On this episode of China Unscripted, there's a new front line in the war between China and the U.S., and the U.S. is badly losing. China is one step closer to conquering the Pacific. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganeshta.
And joining us once again is Cleo Paskal, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Cleo, thanks for joining us again. It's always great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I noticed you didn't use my last name this time during the introduction, so we can smoothly go right into the whole discussion without any hiccups whatsoever.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Anyway, the Solomon Islands, the Pacific Ocean, and the Pacific Island nations. Yeah, every time we have you on, it seems like things get worse afterwards.
Wait, are you saying it's our fault or it's Cleo's fault?
I'm just noticing a correlation. Correlation does not equal causation. But I am noticing a strong correlation.
Do you think things would have been better if we didn't talk about them?
I have no way to prove
that's how
one way or
I
the
solve
other.
the problems in my life. I just don't talk about them, and the problems magically
We have
go away.
a track record, proven track record right there. All right. So thanks for joining us, Cleo. Everything's going to stay the same.
Everything's great in the Pacific.
Great.
Right. Yeah.
You're on to me. I've been actually, running the CCP operations, so I'd have an excuse to come on and hang out with you. And I was hoping to be up in the Quebec bunker, but clearly that's not the case at the moment. So I'll take what I can. And now that I'm on, I can stop those influence operations that are destroying the countries and just luxuriate in the China Unscripted presence.
Well, I mean, things certainly have gotten quite bad. I'm trying to hold the podcast here. Be quiet. Things aren't good in the Solomon Islands. Tell us more.
Okay, now that is correct. So going back, you've covered this story very well and comprehensively, and thank you, because it's important. It's not just the Solomons. Solomons is tragically, for the people of Solomons, become the case study of how China can weaken and almost destroy a country in the process of taking it over. And they did it really fast. So understanding what happened in Solomons shows you a lot about how China operates, not just in the region, but also even in the U.S. I mean, they're direct parallels for a lot of the operations that they were running there. So what happened? The reason it's such a clear case study is because until about 2019, until September 2019 exactly, Solomons recognized Taiwan. And then there was an election just earlier that year. A new person came in, Prime Minister Sogavare, and he unilaterally switched from Taiwan to China. So we have a starting point for the major overt Chinese influence operations. That's September 2019. And after that, what showed how they operate was the groupings within the country that didn't want that closer relationship with China, and how they were attacked. So the classic case within that case study is the case of the premier of Malaita province, which is the most populous province in Solomons, a man called Daniel Suidani, who you interviewed. He and his leadership, it isn't just him, he was representing the will of his people. He was a very popular elected leader, and the traditional chiefs in about a few months later, in October 2019, put out the Auki communique, A-U-K-I. That communique, named after the province capital, Auki, says what they want for their province in terms of development, who they thank in terms of their development partners, and it's U.S., Australia, Israel, like all these, everybody. But they say specifically they do not want any more business coming into the province that is linked to the Chinese Communist Party. And they give a bunch of different reasons, including they believe in freedom of religion, and the Chinese Communist Party is systemically atheist. And so that goes against their core beliefs. They know how people of faith are prosecuted and persecuted in China, and they don't want to deal with a country like that. They also don't want their province turned into a police state. All of these things are listed. It's a very interesting document for understanding how people around the world know what the CCP is and know what happens to their communities and their country when the CCP comes in. But what happened, of course, was when they put that out, Daniel Suidani, the premier of that province, became public enemy number one for Chinese, but also for their proxy prime minister, Sogavari, who came in. So then when Suidani got sick, the central government wouldn't provide funding for him to get medical care. He needed an MRI outside the country. Neither would the Australians. Neither did the Americans. Nobody would help him. They literally wanted him to die. He was an inconvenient person because he was standing up to China and being very clear about why. Luckily, what happened was an influential Indian man had heard about it, got in touch with President Tsai's office in Taiwan, and they got him to Taiwan for the medical care. And then he came back. Well, by the time he came back, Sogavari and that Chinese clique had poured a ton of money into his province to try to get the assembly, provincial assembly, to vote him out in a vote of no confidence, to get rid of him. That didn't work. The people of Malaita province protested and physically blocked the entrance to parliament. And the police in Malaita said, calm down, okay, we get it. We don't want violence here. And they went and they talked to the guys who've been bought off by China. And I'm perfectly comfortable saying you're bought off by China because we've seen bank records of money going to all of these people. Like they're on Twitter, public them. We know who they are. We know some of the amounts that were done through bank transactions. We know the bank account numbers. None of this has been followed up on by anybody, but it's all publicly available now. And so they withdrew because they saw this was going to be a real problem. Now, since then, what happened was there's been a lot of police training, a lot more weapons coming in, including from Australia. The Chinese sent in water cannons. And so now, after kind of a little bit over a year, the pro-Chinese forces in Solomon are better armed. They've spread around a lot more money. They have much better influence operations. And just a few weeks ago, they had another vote of no confidence against Daniel Suidani, and he lost. So he's no longer the premier of Malaita province. And in fact, he's had to leave the country because his team are very concerned that, they'll try to get a trumped up charge and throw him in jail.
How have the people of Malaita province responded to this?
So So Suidani is, they knew this was coming. They've been warning for a while. And he didn't want to give those heavily armed pro-Sogavari police, paramilitary basically, an excuse to kill his people. So they did not even attend the vote in Parliament for the vote of no confidence. They didn't want their people to come out and demonstrate. They knew that the position of the police had changed. For the last vote of no confidence, the police were doing their job normally, but now they've been replaced. In fact, one of the main police kind of chiefs was replaced for this new phase. And this new phase, these police are the concern is much more loyal to Sogavari and to the CCP agenda.
And those police actually were trained in China, some of them, right?
Some of them, yeah.
And armed by Australia.
And armed by Australia. And if I were the Chinese, that's exactly what I do. I try to make sure that the first demonstrators were shot with Australian bullets. That's exactly how they play it. There were riots in Honiara in the capital, and Sogavari got the Australian troops to come in as an excuse to then bring in the Chinese troops, right? So Australia it's either complicit or moronic, but it's not playing a beneficial role at all. And Sogavari, the getting rid of Suidani, of the pro-democracy guy, that's sent a chill throughout the entire Pacific Island region. So there are 4 countries that still recognize Taiwan, and they all have influence operations in their countries that are very similar to this ongoing. So I'm getting calls from people in Marshalls, people in Palau, saying, if nobody will protect Sudani, they're not going to protect me. They're not going to, if we make this stand for democracy in Taiwan and all the things we believe in, but nobody is protecting even the most visible proponent of this in the region, then we're out on a limb. And it's not just our political lives that are at risk.
Well, hey, now, let me push back on that, because the U.S. government, after 30 years of not having an embassy on the Solomon Islands, this month they opened one. So, problem solved, right?
Problem solved. They're good people and they're trying hard, but I think there might be half a dozen of them. And, this is not, this is really, really deep. I mean, tens of millions in cash are the amounts that I've heard of being spread around Solomon's. I can't remember what it is, or 600, 700,000 people. And what happened with the Auki communique, remember, which said no more Chinese business investment. So what the Chinese did, very smart. And again, this is a way of, I highly recommend studying this case because it shows you how they operate. They said, okay, we can't run businesses in Malaita, but you know what? We're going to fund a mini hospital. And so they've said they're going to put in this hospital. Nobody, you can't say no to a hospital. And according to Peter Candelaria, who's the son of the first Prime Minister of Solomons, he's in Parliament, highly respected. He's saying that the bribe money is likely being run through that hospital. So they would normally use a local business, logging or fisheries or whatever, to buy off the locals, but they couldn't do it because the Auki communique. So they're using this hospital to be a cover for laundering the money into the region. The first public announcement of what that new Malaita government is going to do now that they got rid of Sudani is get rid of the Auki communique.
Okay, so let's say I'm an official in Malaita province, and I could really go either way, on the side of justice or on the side of Chinese money. How much from that Chinese slush fund could I get for switching sides?
It depends on what you can deliver. It's highly transactional. So they bought the parliament with half plus one votes. So I think they had 17 votes. So if you're one of those first 16 who are bought off beforehand, you'll get what you're going to get, whatever you had arranged. And as you know, they buy you, but then they've got stuff on you. If you've gone to China and you've done whatever, they might have the tape, they might have all sorts of other.
Oh, the honey traps and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you don't like honey, maple syrup traps, whatever it's
going to be. No, that wouldn't work. Sorry, Cleo.
That would be a sticky situation.
Oh, that was much better. So but you've seen the numbers, right, for some of these bribes. Give us a range of how much these bribes can be.
They can be in the millions. If it's kind of leadership level, yeah. Otherwise, but we've also seen really small amounts in the Marshall Islands, where which recognizes Taiwan, and there was an attempt to set up a special economic zone, country within a country type thing. There was an indictment against the two Chinese involved in New York. And so it's a longer story, but an interesting one.
Well, we'll get back to that, but just in terms of the numbers.
Yeah, so some of those amounts are like $7,000, $22,000. It can be quite small, but it can also be really big. And Solomon's is a very high value acquisition for Beijing. It's an important location. It's the site of the Battle of Guadalcanal just over 80 years ago, Iron Bottom Sound, Tulagi. And the reason that the Japanese attacked there first was the British had set up there. Tulagi was the head of the British setup for running the region. Very good geography, critical geography. So then the Japanese took it, and then the Americans took it back. If you want to blow a hole in Western defenses, you've jumped the first and the second island chain, and you're interdicting Australia.
So you're saying that the Solomon Islands is a really important strategic place to basically fight a war from, to station your naval vessels and Air Force, that sort of thing.
Yeah, offensive or defensive. So, if you've got, and it's not, if you look at where Wang Yi visited, if you look at this map, and you've got the map of where Wang Yi visited during May and June of 2022, you can see he visited the range of countries that go off the coast of Australia and New Zealand. And if you're using the maritime militia and the fishing fleet, you get into a position and you're dropping buoys and you're doing all this other stuff. You're getting into a position where it makes it very hard for Australia or New Zealand to join the fight. You've got a gun to their head right off the coast. So, it's not just about attacking Australia or New Zealand in this case. It's about making Australia or New Zealand not willing to fight because the cost is going to be very high, even if they can break past that island chain.
If, for instance, there was a Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
Yeah, well, functionally, China is setting up its own island chain off the coast of Australia and New Zealand.
So I remember last year there was some talk about a sort of relationship between China and the Solomon Islands, where they were going to maybe allow some Chinese ships to dock there. But Sogavari promised that absolutely definitely the Chinese People's Liberation Army would absolutely never set up a naval base there. So, we should believe him, right?
Yeah, sure. This is a guy who bought off 39 of his 50 members of parliament, enough to change the Constitution, and then amended the Constitution to postpone elections. There's supposed to be elections in 2023, which he'll lose. He's now postponed those elections to an indefinite date. It's supposed to be next year, but we'll see. Because he wants to host the Pacific Games instead.
Well, but the Pacific Games will bring glory to his leadership. So isn't that more important? Yeah,
and what it also does is it gives him an excuse to crack down on any protesters or demonstrators that might disrupt those games. Does this sound familiar to countries that host games like that?
Well, like you were saying, this is a great case study, and it really does show how the Chinese Communist Party can very successfully essentially blow up a democracy from the inside. They get their guy in the top, spread some bribe money around, train some police, and suddenly you have politicians who have a, counter narrative. They get purged. Protesters become at risk. It is stunning to see this happen. And the fact
over the course of just 4 years.
Yeah, it's very fast. I was thinking when you were talking about the police thing that it reminded me a lot of Hong Kong, the difference between Hong Kong police in 2014 and 2019. But it took them years to kind of replace and retrain the police force to be more brutal toward protesters and things like that. But, in this case, the last time there were protests were like 2021, right? So this is... Or if you're talking about the vote of no confidence, then was that a year ago? So in a year, they managed to
completely swap out the
what they
force.
did to Hong Kong police in 5 years.
Yeah, they're getting better at it, and it's it's difficult to underestimate how important it is, and we focus on what the Chinese have done. But one of the reasons that it's been so quick and so effective is there's been zero pushback. They're doing it in a vacuum.
So you're saying that embassy the U.S. built this month, it might be a little, too late?
So the Australians have been, in a Five Eyes context, the Australians have been taking the lead on this. And they have consistently said, and there are a lot of good Australians who are serious about it, not to denigrate them, but the people that seem to be making the policy have consistently said, we've got this under control, don't worry about it, you've got other things to do. So the problem has been, if anything, State Department trusting an ally, which is something that normally should work. But in this case, it really hasn't. And how do you think, Sudani and his team feel when they hear about the Australians trying to cut a new trade deal with China.
Or giving arms to these policemen.
Yeah, well, there's that too. But, they can kind of pretend to justify that somehow. But if at the same time you've got an Australian government that is clearly trying to, quote unquote, patch things up with China, how much are they going to help the people who are standing up to China in the region?
Well, clearly not very much.
No, and they have, and it's just currently, this isn't theoretical. One of the biggest problems in the Pacific Islands is overfishing or illegal fishing, illegal, unregulated, imported fishing. And it's a main source of revenue for a lot of countries in the region. But what's been happening is it's very hard to patrol. The U.S. has tried to step up, especially through the Coast Guard. It has a thing called a ship rider agreement where you can take somebody from a local country and they come on the ship and you can help patrol and interdict in the region. But just to give you an idea of how vast it is, just the North Pacific countries, the freely associated states, are about the size of the continental U.S. And there are approximately, including the Coast Guard and local vessels, maybe 9 or 10 boats that can do it, cutters. That's like patrolling the U.S. with 10 police cars that go 15 miles an hour. So already there's a problem. But you have those cutters that are in the southern part now, and Solomon Islands blocked the U.S. cutter from coming in, U.S. Coast Guard cutter from coming in and refueling in Solomon, and said, it's bureaucratic or whatever. But they have not redressed the situation. They haven't fixed the situation. And in January, Vanuatu also didn't return calls, and a Coast Guard cutter could not come in and pick up the ship rider. So at this very moment, there are two countries that are not actively working with the U.S. on what they say is their primary security concern around economic issues, which is illegal fisheries. And one can only think that the only country that benefits from that is China, because of the illegal fisheries that it does, and also because it takes those patrol vessels out so they can't monitor all of the other activity the Chinese are doing. So it has real on the ground implications for ability to protect the economic security of the region and just to operate in the region. It's already happening.
And you were saying that essentially the purge of Sudani has had a ripple effect throughout the region, and what's going to happen now? Are countries in the region? It doesn't seem like they're going to be siding up with like the U.S. and Australia because there's no help there. What is the ramifications of this? Well,
it's enormous. I mean, every country, as we saw with Solomon's, it took the right/wrong leader to get in, and it completely changed in one term, right? So every country in the region is one election away, and this is China's goal, from essentially creating such a state of entropy within those countries that China gets its claws in and starts to dismantle the democracy from the inside. And some of them are further along in the process, and some of them are extremely high value targets for China, and in particular, countries that recognize Taiwan, but also countries that have this unique relationship with the U.S., the freely associated states. So Palau, Marshall Islands, and Federated States of Micronesia. And they're all saying there's massive amounts of Chinese money coming in, trying to get their people in the next election.
It's interesting now because there's a story blowing up in Canada right now, right, about Chinese money going to influence Canadian elections. So even if people think, oh, well, like these are some small Pacific islands.
It hits close to home.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's especially since you're in rural Quebec, right? So you're at the epicenter of that sort of thing. this is if Beijing is gonna go after Taiwan, if it tries to invade and hold Taiwan, then the security perimeter starts from Taiwan and goes out. And what's out in all of here is the Pacific Island, and they know it, and they're being as vocal as they can. President Panuelo put up an incredible erudite analysis of what the Chinese are doing in the region and why it's a problem. The Palau National Security Coordinator put out a two-pager on where the Wanwang 5 is operating in their waters. The Marshall Islands, as mentioned before, were almost the subject of creating a country within a country through bribery. Like, it's not for them. This is daily stuff. I was in Palau not that long ago, and people say that's where the Chinese brothel is. That's this person is on this take. That person, everybody knows, and it's a daily thing. And Palau is a country that recognizes Taiwan, and it recently last year hosted the Our Oceans Conference, which is a big international gathering. And the U.S. put pressure on them to cover over the signs on the buildings that had been built with Taiwanese aid, to cover over the Taiwanese flags. And they said that this is the U.S. putting pressure on Palau, and said, can't invite President Tsai or else Kerry won't come to your conference. So they're getting squeezed by the Chinese. They're getting heavily targeted by the Chinese, but there's no help seemingly coming.
Why would the U.S. do that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, ask them, and not only just ask them. I mean, this isn't getting covered, so they can do it in darkness, and they don't have to answer.
I mean, but why would anybody prefer John Kerry than President Tsai, who's awesome?
Fair point.
She is awesome, and it's an indicator of misaligned priorities or something.
I mean, let me wildly speculate that this has something to do with Kerry wanting to have climate change agreements with, the Chinese Communist Party, and not wanting to show up at an event where there are Taiwanese flags everywhere, right? And then he thinks that there's going to be blowback from the Chinese side, and maybe they won't get these climate agreements.
On the other side, the Biden administration has done a lot of things to stand up for Taiwan. There was a democracy summit last year where they invited Taiwan.
But then they didn't let the person present something where they didn't want them to call Taiwan a country. There was something with the PowerPoint presentation.
It is pretty weird.
Well, it's like there's, on the one hand, there's this show of support, while there's, the other hand, holding it back.
It's cowardice, really.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what would happen, angering China stuff, right?
Well, I mean, at least on the bright side, there is no Chinese money floating around the U.S. government.
Nothing to worry about.
Nothing to worry about.
There's that, but and it's also just wrong. I mean, that's not how you deal with Beijing. It's bad policy. You first of all, you stand up for your principles, because that's how you and your allies can work together. And imagine if Tsai was there and people were working together, and if the U.S. had backed Suidani, and all that sort of stuff, China would be completely on the back foot and would be, have to replan, but also its entire negotiating posture would be undermined. So because you were talking about people in Solomon's or wherever who are taking some Chinese money and how much it is. And in many cases, it isn't that much. And if the message was, if you take the Chinese money, you're never going to get a visa to Australia or New Zealand or the US, that changes the equation very quickly. All Australia would have to do is to do its job and to investigate disproportionate assets from Pacific Island leaders and others that are invested in their country. Sogavari's relatives, or at least one of them that we know of, launders Chinese money via Australia. There's been at least one good article about it. So, we know it. So all they need to do is do the right thing and stand up combined, and you would be in a better negotiating position vis-a-vis China.
Well, I'm just glad China's not trying to buy off politicians in Australia, because could you imagine how bad that situation would be?
Well, I mean, it's a little harder to do that now than it was in 2018, probably, right? But Cleo, you mentioned like if the U.S. had backed Soudani, like what should the U.S. have done, or what should other countries have done in this situation?
So the Chinese Communist Party approach is there's three strands to it. So it'll come in with a commercial face. It'll say, we just want to do business. It's just development, and that's always entwined with the strategic element to it. Better positioning. The advancement of China's comprehensive national power, and the third strand is corruption. It's never clean. It never plays by the books. So if you pull on that third strand, which is the strand that the West has, it has the economic and it has the strategic, and sometimes it has the corruption as well. But the Chinese corruption is so embedded; it's such a deep part of it. If you pull on the corruption thread, the other two weaken very, very quickly. So you go after the illegal money. These guys have to hide their money somewhere. You go after it. You make it not pay. You don't do what the Australians do, which is, if the Chinese give you guns, we'll give you guns. You don't compete on China's turf. China's corrupt, amoral, horrific turf. You compete on the turf that is the solid ground that we say is what we have grown out of. Democracy, transparency, human rights, accountability, all that kind of stuff, which we think of as a cliche, but in a place like Solomon's is a dream. It's an aspiration. Soudani was given the option of taking money from the federal government for his medical treatment if he let the Chinese companies operate in his province, and he said no. He would rather die than take Chinese money. He believes in what the West says it believes in, much more so than the West. And those are the people who you want to work with and encourage and learn from and build off of. So don't kind of do what the Chinese do, which is look at the most kind of corrupt, amoral person there is and figure out how to twist them to use them to your advantage. Find the good people and give them the tools that they need to be able to fight for themselves and for their people, because they will fight stronger and harder than anybody else will.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That really hits, like, all the talk of supporting human rights, freedom, democracy. It's that Chinese money. But
I mean, I also think there's this hesitancy on the side of like the US or Australia too with, are we interfering in...
Do you think it's like some kind of weird like colonialism fear going around?
I mean, the CCP has weaponized that, right?
Yeah.
Like accusing the US of imperialism everywhere.
Yes, it's definitely the US that's being the colonizers in this case.
So I'd say there are two things. One is I think that there's quite a bit of racism in the West's approach to the island in many different ways. But just to give you one example, when both Solomons and Vanuatu said we're not going to let in we didn't let in the Coast Guard cutters because bureaucracy, that sort of played into this narrative of these incompetent islanders, they just lost the paperwork, right? That's racist. They're just as good as anybody else at paperwork. They can sort it out if they want. They have Chinese ships coming in and out all the time. They want to clear one U.S. Coast Guard cutter that has had an appointment with them for a long time, and they can do it. They didn't pick up the phones. They didn't want to do it. But those who are so inclined can pretend that this is just incompetence as opposed to a very deliberate decision that has strategic implications. The other thing is about domestic interference. You don't have to do this stuff in the other country. You go after the Chinese money, Sogavari's clique's money that's being laundered in Australia and New Zealand. You clean up your own system. And by cleaning up your own system, you give a lot less maneuvering room to those who are using you and your systems in order to facilitate their corruption.
Well, I mean, we've been painting a pretty bleak picture so far, but I don't think it's the case that the CCP is entirely getting its way in the Pacific. I mean, didn't Fiji recently reject a Chinese policing deal?
So it did, but
no, Cleo, throw me a bone. I need some good news.
So the good news is, I'll explain why I'm not so optimistic on the Fiji police thing first, and then I'll give you the good news. So this is a new prime minister who's come in, and it was the old one who brought in the Chinese police, and I think he just was concerned about their loyalty to him. So you want to clean brush the system, especially if they're in your investigative policing units, and make sure that your own people are loyal. And also, you do it, and the West pats you on the back and gives you a little bit more maneuvering room for the other stuff you might want to do that they might not have approved of otherwise. He's a very good politician, that guy. Don't underestimate any of these Pacific leaders. They're a smart, skilled bunch. The good news is there are all these people who are trying. I mean, we know about the Soudani story because Soudani and they're not a party, his political grouping and the people of Malaita and the traditional leaders and the church groups and the media all stood up. The bad guys, so to speak, within Solomon's, it's a very small group. It replicates the Chinese system where they think if you control a few people at the top and you've got enough fear in the society, you can control the society. But that doesn't mean that the population wants it. And in this case, the population knows there's something different. There are still 4 countries in the Pacific that recognize Taiwan. There are brave leaders across the region who just need a little bit of help. So the good news is they are leading the way in understanding China and explaining China. And with a little bit of help, this case study could not be over. This case study could change into how to fight Chinese political warfare and win.
Well, so then what should the U.S., Australia, what should be done to help support these people? And if the U.S. and Australian government isn't going to do that, what can the people of America and Australia do to push the politicians to actually do something?
So, as I mentioned, go after the money, but also just interview them, talk to them, learn from them. Soudani is likely on his way to the United States. Hopefully, there'll be an ability for him to be on a speaking tour, whatever. These guys know how China operates at a very ground level. They know how they buy them, how they flow the money. They understand Chinese political warfare better than the vast majority of people sitting in the think tanks in DC. Talk to them, learn from them. They'll tell you what they need. They know how to fight this. So there's that. The other thing is that broaden the group of allies. Japan, has a role to play. India, the foreign affairs Jaishankar leader was in Fiji just recently, and Prime Minister Modi is heading to Papua New Guinea sometime within the next few months. And India, we've talked about this before, India has the ability to displace a lot of what China does at the ground level economically, also in terms of telemedicine and e-education, all that sort of stuff, in a way that actually can help build up a society from the bottom up, which isn't what you want. You want this kind of dispersed, ground level democratic structure. India can be very helpful for that. So, even if you're just looking only at the Quad, those other 2 Quad members, Japan and India, also can be very helpful and have a role to play.
Do you think that there is? It seems like Australia's had its head in the sand for years now regarding the Solomons and the Pacific. Do you think that there is any turnaround happening in the U.S. Like, I know when the new Australian government came in, the Albanese government came in, they talked a lot about wanting to change how things are in the Pacific, but is there actually anything going on?
So on the U.S. side, there's so the U.S. is, none of these countries are monolith, and I'd say on defense, like Indo-PACOM, they get it and they're trying hard. There's a predilection in state to still be quite reliant on Australia and New Zealand at the top level. So Indo-Pacific National Security Council Indo-Pacific Coordinator Kurt Campbell will still repeatedly and publicly talk about how important the relationship with Australia is in the region. Like that. But people who are operating in the region get told by the people in the region always, we want to deal with the U.S. bilaterally and directly. And when that happens, better things function. But there are a whole series of issues. I'll talk to you a little bit about Palau because I was just in Palau. And Palau is the site of the announced over-the-horizon radar installation that the U.S. is putting in the Northern Pacific. I went to go see the site of the receiving station, where the receiving station is going to be built. It's on an island called Angar. You can see Peleliu from Angar. They were critical battle locations during World War II. Angar has a population of about 100, and there's a Japanese war memorial. It's just the history is all over it and is in it, including a lot of unexploded ordnances. So when I got there to see this installation, how it was being developed, everything was at a dead stop. The bulldozers and everything are parked. The construction has ceased because the way that they normally do the demining in a place like Palau, in this particular case, is they work with a Norwegian NGO, and the Norwegian NGO does it with a metal detector and a shovel. And the contractors that had come in on the U.S. project had started clear-cutting, bulldozing, and digging down 3 feet. And the Palauan government said, you don't have environmental clearance for that. You're not allowed to do that. And so they had to stop and are now in the process of trying to get their environmental clearances. And somebody quite high up in U.S. defense came to Palau and reportedly told the president of Palau, well, if you stop our construction, then, we're going to have to fire our Palauan workers just before Christmas. And wouldn't that be terrible? And the Palauan president said, yeah, it's not going to reflect well on you, but, you can't threaten me with this. You didn't do the right thing. You didn't get the clearances. And so now you got to get the clearances. So it stopped. So even this one little case of trying to put in this over-the-horizon radar thing, it can break down at the ground level with the wrong contractors, with an inappropriate approach to partners. And this is just phase one. There are 3 phases. Phase 2 is apparently has gone to a Turkish company for the construction of the platform and whatnot. And the rumors going around Angar are that, and this may or may not be true, are that a large number of Turkish men are going to come to their island of 100 people to do this construction. They haven't been consulted. This may not be the case. It may just be a breakdown in communication, but it's fairly typical of the mismanagement of the relationship on the U.S. side that can lead to a big opening for Chinese political warfare. The people of Angar now are annoyed and scared at this installation going in. And one of them was telling me that, he asked when they heard about the installation, are you going to build us bunkers? Because you put in this radar receiving station on Angar, we just jumped way up the Chinese targeting list. And during World War II, we hid in caves. But the caves aren't going to be enough with these new Chinese weapons. So are you going to build us bunkers? And at the same time, they're not even resolving this confusion over what sort of workers are going to come and work on the island. So Chinese can come in and say, the Americans disrespect you. They destroyed your islands once before. They're not listening to any of your concerns. Why don't you just not have this radar station? Why don't you just take money from us to build a hospital instead?
Why is the Chinese Communist Party so much better at this?
Because they care, frankly.
Communist Party, we care.
They care about advancing the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. Because they have a focus and and a goal, and in this case, if they can take Palau off the map, it makes Taiwan a lot easier.
Well, Palau is very close to Taiwan.
Yeah, it's a couple hours down from Guam and over from Philippines.
Yeah, I guess that's the issue. The Chinese Communist Party has a goal in the Pacific, and it's very unclear what the United States or Australia's goal in the Pacific is. And there probably isn't one.
Yeah, Australia's goal, I mean, in the end, there are a lot of different Australias, but the one that seems to be leading the way, Australia's goal seems to be to make the U.S. think it's important in doing something. They've given over their defense and security to the U.S. There's a negotiation going on now about the financial aspect of that relationship. It happens once every 20 years. It happens to be now, and it happens to be at the time of elections in these places with extremely bad timing. It's become extremely political. But all three of them send a lot of their young men and women to join the U.S. Armed Forces at a much higher percentage than many U.S. states. But when they come back to their countries, they get none of the normal things that you would think they would get. They can't even get their VA medicine mailed to them, even though they have U.S. postal codes. The relationship is so close between Palau, FSM, and Marshall Islands to the U.S. They have postal codes, U.S. postal codes. So it wouldn't, necessarily cost the VA anything extra to send them their medicine. And so I was talking to somebody in RMI in Marshall Islands about this. He was a recruiter, 20 years in the U.S. Army. And he was saying he had one young man who came back. He had PTSD. It couldn't be handled in Marshall's. He couldn't get his medication, and he took his own life. And as a recruiter, he feels like a former recruiter, that's such a fundamental betrayal of the relationship between the two countries, that these veterans, if they feel abandoned like that, and which they are in many cases, they can either talk about, they're the living embodiment in their villages and their families, the relationship, trust relationship between their countries and the U.S. And they can either defend that relationship or they can damage that relationship. If the U.S. isn't, you've got somebody who's lost a limb in Iraq and he has to pay out of pocket to try to get to Guam or Hawaii for medical care, and he may get it reimbursed or he may not get it reimbursed, and he has to go through all this paperwork. There's nobody there to help him. I mean, they used to get their medicine sent to them, apparently, a certain amount of, this is what this recruiter was saying, he used to get it, and then it stopped, and they don't know why. And there are many other, Kwajalein, Marshall Islands has the Kwajalein base. Normally, somebody in his position could walk onto any base around the world and go to the shop, the PX shop, and buy stuff and take it home. Not in Kwajalein. He can't walk into the PX in Kwajalein and buy something and take it off to another island. It's only for those that are on that island. So it's insult after insult and damage after damage. And if you want good news, it's a miracle that these people have decided to stay in their relationship with the United States for so long. But that's not a guaranteed thing. And there's a lot of PRC money going in to make sure that doesn't continue.
So speaking of PRC money, I want to get back to something you brought up earlier, which is the Marshall Islands. and this Chinese special economic zone, and there was an attempt to set that up. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So this is a ethnic Chinese couple who became naturalized Marshallese, who ran an NGO that was affiliated to the United Nations, and they seem to have relationships with a lot of other countries as well, including in the Pacific. The Kiribati and Vanuatu have been mentioned in other places. So I'll give you the Marshall story, but again, it's kind of a case study to keep an eye on for other locations. So Marshalls, again, it's a country that recognizes Taiwan. It was at the site of some very serious battles. It's highly strategic. It has a lot of islands that are spread out over a large area, home to the Kwajalein. And during that period, the U.S. nuked Marshalls 67 times, including some very major tests. This is Bikini and all that stuff that ended up irradiating one of the atolls, Rongelap Atoll. The population of Rongelap was eventually, after 2 or 3 days, evacuated somewhere else. They came back. There's a lot of back and forth, but this atoll was affected by those nuclear tests. This Chinese couple said that they were going to wanting to set up a special economic zone in Rongelap, which would, do all sorts of business and those sorts of things, and it would have its own customs and immigration, and basically a country within a country. And they started buying up very influential people, according to the indictment that we saw subsequently. And it came within one vote that the legislation to set up this special zone came within one vote of passing within the parliament and becoming real. And it seriously disrupted Marshallese politics. They eventually were indicted. They could be indicted in New York because the NGO was based in New York, and they pled out. Now, the problem with pleading out is we now don't have publicly the names of the Marshallese that operated with them. And they're very influential, and they're still in power, some of them. And so they now have a vested interest in not having more U.S. oversight on their activities, because if there is more oversight, they might be found out, and that could be very bad for them. So that's how the Chinese system, even if you go after one part of it, if you don't go back after all of it, if you don't publicize the names and give the people in the countries the tools they need to clean up their own system, you're actually hardening that pro-Chinese fleet and making it even harder for others in the country. And by the way, I've heard that there's a similar project being proposed for Palau.
So what would have been the value for the Chinese Communist Party of having this special economic zone in the Marshall Islands, which frankly, it's in the middle of the Pacific, like it's kind of nowhere. It's not even that close to Taiwan, and it's not like a U.S. territory like, Guam or Saipan. So like, what's the point?
So if you remember, Keating, Admiral Keating testified, I can't remember, 2008, 2009, about a Chinese senior official who came up to him at some point and said, why don't you take Hawaii East and we'll take Hawaii West, and don't worry, we'll tell you what's going on. So if you believe that one of the strategic maps in the head of Beijing is pushing the U.S. back to Hawaii, a win in Marshalls is huge. You eventually, first of all, you break this compact of free association. You say it's not U.S. territory, and it's not U.S. territory, but that compact of free association means that the U.S. treats those waters almost as importantly as domestic waters. And in fact, that's what when it was first set up, the president said that protect you like we would protect ourselves. So you push the U.S. out of those waters, and much more back towards Hawaii. And if you can do it in FSM and Palau as well, you've done it. You've pushed the U.S. back to Hawaii. You'll still have Guam and Marianas, but if you avoid them and you don't trigger a response there, it becomes very difficult for the U.S. to refuel, to patrol, to have a reason to be in the area. It's a very big strategic win.
Do you think that possibility is still out there then?
Yeah. So they have elections coming up in November, and I know because very reliable sources have said that there's just the amount of Chinese money flowing in to try to affect that election are enormous. Plus, there are those people who did not get indicted on the Rongelap thing, who are still in the system and who are going to protect themselves, and who at this point they're kind of halfway down the road to China, and turning back towards the U.S. doesn't seem to offer very much, so they might go in even deeper. And there's even a Chinese who's naturalized Marshallese who's running in the election and is pro-Beijing. I mean, it's that overt.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking that there was this idea of China gets control of everything on the one side of Hawaii. I mean, even though, other than Guam and Saipan, the U.S. doesn't have territory there. I mean, that's ceding Asia to the Chinese Communist Party. What about Japan? What about South Korea, the Philippines, Taiwan? Obviously, we know how that goes. But yeah, that idea is just a horrifying world dominated by the Communist Party.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's their goal. That's the goal. And again, for the good news, there are leaders in the region who really don't want that. So that's why you're seeing Philippines saying, maybe you do want to come back in the United States. Who would have thought that a couple of years ago? But they see what's going on, and they see how fast it's happening. And the Suidani thing, it really sent a chill through the region. They had been gunning for him since October 2019, and they got him. And the U.S., Australia, New Zealand didn't say anything, nothing. And there's no major news reporting about what the implications are at all. Started trying to, paint him as a pro-independence guy. So basically saying he's a troublemaker, and so we can get rid of him. It's not. They did it. They did it. You guys. I mean, you're the only ones that have talked to Suidani. In the U.S., as far as I know. So there have been no support along the way, and there's no support now. And those who are fighting the Marshallese election based on all of those principles that we talked about and not taking Chinese money see that, and they're scared. And more important, the people who are vacillating are trying to think about what's in it for me. If I back the pro-democracy guy, what am I get nothing for my family. I might get fired. I might not be able to pay my school fees, whatever. If I go with the Chinese, at least I know I'll be able to pay the rent this month.
Right. Unless the U.S. steps in and freezes the bank accounts of people, who are laundering money, et cetera. And then it totally changes the calculus, right?
Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
Well, so far we've kind of talked about, the Chinese, what China is doing, what the U.S. and Australia are not doing. But, the Pacific Island nations are not just, secondary characters in their own stories. They have their own agency. What are things that they should be doing?
I'm glad you asked, because this kind of a bit infuriating. A lot of the talk about how to engage with the Pacific Islands in a place like DC says, we need to work with the Pacific Island Forum, which is this regional grouping. The regional grouping there are several regional groupings. There's one called the SPC, which does very good work, very good technical work. Pacific Island Forum specifically is supposed to be about kind of political and economic policy making in the region. I can tell you what they haven't done. They haven't objected to U.S. Coast Guard cutters being blocked from the ports of two of their members when they were on operations that were supposed to benefit the region as a whole. They also haven't said, you know, those Pacific Games that you want to run, Sogavari, and that you said are so important that you're not going to have your election? We think the election is more important, so we're not going to go to your Pacific Games. Yeah, there are all these things that they could be doing to back up each other and the things that they say they stand for: democracy, transparency, accountability, human rights, sustainable development, all of those things. So the Pacific Island Forum, which has an enormous amount of Australian and New Zealand influence in it, is not making even the most basic stands that you'd think would be no-brainers. And what's kind of more interesting is it fragmented a couple of years ago when the countries of the North Pacific, and again, these are the three freely associated states: Palau, Micronesia, Republic of Marshall Islands, as well as Nauru and Kiribati, left because they felt like they weren't being properly represented in the choice of Secretary General. And they had put forward as Secretary General somebody from Marshall Islands, a country that recognizes Taiwan. And it's possible one of the factors that made it that Australia and New Zealand, along with a few others, voted against that Secretary General was because he was from a country that recognized Taiwan and the Chinese wouldn't like it. Well, they've agreed to come back in, but one of the conditions is essentially they get to pick the next Secretary General. And they've just said that their candidate for Secretary General is going to come from Nauru, which is another country that recognizes Taiwan. So the Pacific Island Forum now is going to have to show whether it puts Pacific cohesion over not annoying China. It's going to be a very interesting election, that election.
When is that election?
I'm not sure, but they're kind of discussing it and negotiating. There are meetings going on, but the announcement was made very recently that Nauru is going to be putting forth the Secretary General candidate. And Nauru, I don't know if you remember, but Nauru held a regional meeting at one point, and the Chinese so-called diplomat tried to get his way, and he was basically shut down by the Nauruan leaders. They're good. This is it. This is the good news. There are all these people out there who are really good. They just need a little bit of help to make sure that the playing field is level, and they can just get on with running their country without this juggernaut of Chinese money and intel distorting their society's political systems.
Well, thank you very much for joining us again and telling us about what's happening. Hopefully, the next time we have you on, you'll break your streak and things will have gotten better in the Pacific.
Well, yeah, we can, or we can talk about another place where the Chinese have created all sorts of problems. The Pacific will be fine, and then we can get back to talking about what they're doing to Canada.
I like the sound of that. Cleo, always a pleasure.
Oh, yes. I didn't respond immediately because I'm overwhelmed with getting to hang out with you again. I really am. You are the ones that interviewed Sudan. You're the ones that have been following this story for so long, and I'm incredibly grateful. If we're going to even fight, let alone win, this is the way to do it. And you guys have been leading the way for a long time at great cost, and so thank you very much.
Well, thank you for making the introduction to Suidani. If he is coming to the United States, we should try to get him on again. Let us know in the comments if you'd like to see more of that. You better say yes.
And speaking of comments, you would just be 3 people in rural Quebec twiddling your thumbs without all the watchers. So if you've made it all the way to the end, especially, thank you very much, A.
Yes. Thank you. We love you. The Chinese Communist Party hates you. That got you, Shelley.
It did. I wasn't expecting that.
Even after all these years, I can still surprise you. Okay, I guess that's the end of the podcast.
Thanks, Cleo.
Well, that was a crushing, depressing nightmare.
Yeah. It's like there'll be some good news at the end, right?
Yeah, I feel like we were promised good news and then did not get good news.
Yeah, the good news was like, hey, there are some good people in the world.
It's kind of unspecific good news.
Yeah,
like a general, there are good people left.
And
We're
like
still
supposedly
fighting.
I'm part of that. I don't buy it. I wouldn't be a member of any club that would have me as a member or whatever that was. But yeah, I think the sad thing is just like how little anyone is paying attention.
Oh yeah, total head in the sand.
No media coverage.
Well, I can explain that. So I was looking at whether it'd be possible for us to actually go to the Solomon Islands. I've never found a place on this planet that has an inhabited city that is harder to get to than the major cities of Solomon Islands. Like, it's so hard to get to. It's more than 2 days of continuous travel.
Hard to get to from the U.S., less hard to get to from Australia.
Yeah, like if you're in Brisbane or even Sydney, like you can go from Brisbane to the Solomon Islands. So I really can't excuse that. I meant from like if you work for the New York Times, you have to fly New York to LA.
They're not going to send someone from the New York Times. They
Right.
should send someone from like, their Asia people.
Yeah, and they could, but they don't. I was trying to give them like a, I understand why you're not dedicating a lot of resources, but you're right. That's stupid. No, you don't have that excuse.
Well, I do think that it seems remote for people, right? Like,
Well, yeah,
Yes.
that is the other problem with, it's the American people who don't really like South Pacific. What? That was a musical, right?
Right.
It was a musical.
And also like these island nations, like the Solomon Islands has less than 1 million people.
Palau has what, 20,000? So,
Yeah. And so like, you talked about Hong Kong, right? And how Hong Kong, it took 5 years for the CCP to like turn the police around. But Hong Kong is like 7 million people, right? These Pacific Island nations like combined are all smaller than the population
And Hong
of
Kong was like deeply enmeshed in the Western business world too.
Yeah. But I'm just saying like it's so easy to get these like population-wise really small countries, geography-wise spread out, but really, really important.
I mean, I didn't know how to pronounce Kiribati like 4 years ago, like before we started really covering
You
the Pacific.
didn't?
I know.
Were you saying Kiribati or something?
I know.
Shelley,
like a
come
fool.
on.
Yeah. Well, just, all these like Nauru, Vanuatu, like there's just so many of these tiny countries that are just kind of ripe for the CCP to come in.
Because we don't know what they are.
Well, also, it's infuriating that a lot of it is due to our own incompetence, right? Like
Yeah.
her stories about like U.S. like military vets in these islands not being able to get their medicine shipped to them.
Committing
like,
suicide because they can't get PTSD treatment.
yeah,
For
that's
fighting in U.S. wars.
It's like that's terrible. Like, it's inexcusable. So
Yeah, definitely.
you can see how. I mean, now I think the U.S. government is kind of trying to do like a late kind of 180.
Well,
on
it's
a
like
lot
we were saying earlier. It's like this weird, like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Or it's not even that. It's that the left hand hates the right hand, is trying to do everything it can to stop it.
Wait, hold on. What is the left hand and the right hand in your analogy?
The left hand is always the side of evil. The accusers, the bad. The right hand is...
It's the sinister side?
Yes.
No, but I
Being very
actually
biblical.
meant like, are you talking about like the left hand is the State Department and the right hand is the DOD,
No,
or just like
the forces that are like, hey, we should show support for Taiwan. No, we should make sure they don't get to speak at the Summit for Democracy because that would be bad. We don't want John Kerry to be in the same place as the president of Taiwan.
yeah, that would be awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it would be
Kerry. Why
insulting.
is Kerry? I never understood. Why is John Kerry important? Why does anyone care about him anymore?
I mean,
why does anyone care about him? Sorry,
look, if you
wrong
lose a
time for that.
presidential election, then it means you just keep failing upwards.
By
That's
that logic,
true.
I failed.
Well, but think about, that's right. Like all the people who lost the presidential election, like Buttigieg, Harris.
Oh, they bowed out though.
Yeah, because they were going to lose.
But also because, I mean, anyway. So, but like John Kerry lost the 2004 election to George Bush, right? But then he became Secretary of State under Obama. Now he's the special, like, climate czar person. Like,
Yeah. It is
and
bizarre.
I mean, we've talked about this before on the show that like there are people within the Biden administration who are mad at Kerry for interfering in their China policy because there were a bunch of leaks about it, you know, a couple of years ago.
There's another left-hand, right-hand situation.
Yeah.
But it's almost good that that happens so we can at least know about it. Like if they're anonymously leaking to the Washington Post, at least that's almost a form of accountability. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I
It'd
mean,
be better
yeah,
if it wasn't anonymous, just saying.
Well, yes.
Well, I mean, that is supposed to be the role of the media, to check institutions of power. I mean, we just did that episode on America Uncovered about how, like, the major focus of journalism now is that objectivity is bad, which doesn't give me great hope for talking about Palau.
Let's talk about the Pacific Islands. That seems more cheerful than that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's all part of the same thing. It's like, you know, what are they doing?
Who doing?
Anyone.
Okay.
Is anyone doing a thing?
We're having a podcast.
That's right. And you are listening. So together.
I mean, I find it both inspiring and terrifying that Cleo thinks that we're on the front line of covering this issue because
I know.
because we're just three people in a room on YouTube, like
Couple of knuckleheads.
yeah. But, you know, still more press than Daniel Soudani has gotten from anybody else.
It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy.
Well, at least good for us. And good for you.
Like morally good, not like it benefited you good.
Yeah.
Cool. Is this how it ends?
This is where we start to go really off the rails.
Oh no, I think that already happened.
No, we were pretty on the ball.
Hey, Shelley, have you ever seen Babylon 5?
No.
Oh, man. So, I'll spare you. I'll spare you. This thing's
Leave
I
it
really
for
say.
space what was the...
Unvacuumed?
No, it was...
Unexplored.
No, it was...
Unfrontiered.
Unfrontiered. I was going to say it was a Star Trek reference.
Oh, yeah. This
Yeah.
is the part of the podcast where we like try to remember stuff and we can't.
Yeah.
So anyone who's still watching, you are Team MVP. Thank you for watching China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Chong.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
Talk to you next time.